All right, again, welcome everyone to this uh, another episode in the series of ancient history of Bharat. Okay, one thing that I've realized through this journey of uncovering our history is that the rabbit hole goes down very deep. Okay, there have been deliberate and I would say deliberate, intentional, and the intensity of the efforts that were made to deliberately hide these things from us, from the mass of the populace, is just mind-boggling. All right, to a lay person like me who is not a conventional academician or a historic scholar. Okay, I possess no degree or no formal training in learning history, but as a matter of fact, you don't need a formal training to learn history. Okay, maybe for other sciences such as anthropology and all those things you might need formal training, but simply just learning history from the native perspective, for that you don't need formal training. All right, but yes, there were like, and there are continuous efforts that were made to hide the real history of Bharat, the Aryan history of Bharat, the Aryan roots of Bharat. Okay, now that makes you want to think, why exactly would somebody make these efforts? Okay, why were these efforts made in the first place? What was the issue with telling us the right history about our ancestors? Okay, the answer to lies in the fact that when the Christian colonizers came over here, they had to project their racial superiority in one way or the other to make us feel bad about ourselves. Okay, and that hangover has still managed to continue long after at least physically the colonizer has left. Okay, you'll also see people also convert to either of the monotheistic tradition, be it Christianity or Islam. They would convert majorly due to the embarrassment, to the embarrassment that they are subjected to on the, you know, because of the race. Because like people would say that, oh, you are a pagan, you are a defeated race, you are a subjugated race. We are the new. We are the new religion, the monotheistic colonizers. You convert to either one of us, and you can you know, claim the traditional and the cultural pride that comes with us. All right. But yeah, there is nothing original about either of the monotheistic tradition. Whatever festivals they celebrate, whatever culture or tradition that they have copied pagans. They have imitated pagans to a larger scale. Okay, Islam in more particular. Okay, there is nothing original about it that you can exclusively trace it back to its original roots. But that's again a debate for a different video. Right now we are going to focus on the Aryan roots of Bharat, and all these uncovering would make you realize why exactly were these things kept away from us. All right, so yeah, now number one is, why does the Western world get so much of cold feet when we talk about the Aryan world? Because partially the Nazi Germany has soiled the name Aryan in a way that it's difficult to salvage the name that is Aryan, because they have exploited it to the level that it becomes difficult to salvage the Aryan name, because they've killed in the name of it. They have claimed that they were the original homeland. But in this episode, we are going to bust that myth that no, Germans were not the, or whatever that they thought, whatever the ramblings and ruminations that went about in Nazi Germany related to the Aryan race and all that is all false, is all facade. It was used as an intellectual justification for ends of National Socialism. Okay, but more about that in other and future videos of this channel. We are definitely going to cover that, how the name Aryan has been soiled by Nazi Germany and how it has become synonymous to being a dictator and whatnot. But more about that later. Right now we are going to focus on chapter number 10 in this book of the Vedic Age, written by RC Majumdar. The name of that chapter is the Aryan problem. Why does the West, why do they have their knickers in a twist when we talk about the Aryan problem? Why do they want, like, collaboration? Why do they want some acknowledgement that the identity that was Aryan, okay, has to have some or the other Western or white contribution? Okay, because multiple theories that I am learning in the course of this book is, all of them, largely all of them, are based on assumptions. There is no concrete evidence to prove that the Aryan identity or the Aryan language or whatever, whatever limits the word Aryan has anything to do with the Western world. Okay, there is no conclusive evidence, whereas there is evidence beyond doubt in the Vedic scriptures about the Aryan origin. Okay, so why exactly is the West making so much efforts to stake their claim on Aryanhood? Makes you wonder, because the level of development, the level of intellectual development, the level of cultural development that the Aryans had, okay, they cannot stand to acknowledge or concede that it would have come out without the help and without the aid of the West. Because currently the dominant narrative is that everything good is supposed to come out from the West. If you want to look towards the role model of democracy, if you want to look towards the standard of democracy, you're always supposed to look towards the West. Right? Yes, so let's start with chapter number 10, the Aryan problem. All right, let's see. In 1786, William Jones, he also adopted the title of Sir. Yeah, these British people have a habit of adopting these fancy titles. But the name of that fellow was William Jones. Okay, in his famous address of the Asiatic Society of Bengal, he thus established the common origin of a number of languages, such as Greek, Latin, Gothic, Celtic, or Celtic, Sanskrit and Persian, etc. Now, why exactly did they feel the need to have, to establish that all these languages had a common origin? Latin, Greek, Gothic, and Sanskrit for that matter. How exactly do, because they commonly call these things as Indo-European languages. Okay, look at the contemporary scenarios in both these parts of the world. Okay, South Asia and Western Europe. Okay, do you think any of these communities or civilizations have anything in common? But here it was William Jones who spoke in 1786. Keep in mind, in 1786, the British, they were consolidating their powers. Obviously, it was in their vested interest to come up with these theories of Indo-European and Indo-Germanic languages, and all the languages have a common origin, because it was a dominant belief up until then that Sanskrit is the mother of all languages, be it Latin, be it Greek. Okay, Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. So they needed to stake some claim. They could not see, or they could not stand to concede and acknowledge that it was indeed this civilization that came upon its own with a language that taught the world the way of the life. Okay, otherwise, how would they justify their racial superiority? Okay, keep in mind that this has been pointed out by a lot of people as well. When the British came over here, they were hardly in thousands. Okay, some estimates say 100,000 soldiers. So how exactly how exactly did they manage to capture this geography of Bharat? Okay, when they were so small in number. The answer to that is cultural subjugation. Okay, when they came over here with these ideas of racial superiority. And keep in mind, the people of Bharat, they take their culture very seriously. And plus, okay, there is something within the inherent character of Bharat where it is very rare to see in other parts of the world, is intellectual honesty. All right, whenever we come across something that deserves due credit, we will give it. Okay, we have never usurped any intellectual property. Then you will say there are arguments to be made that then what about generic medicines? Okay, generic medicines are largely used for the public welfare. Okay, the motive behind the larger motive behind generic medicines is not profit, it's public welfare. Okay, because the mass of the population cannot afford the real medicine. Okay, so we definitely have more intellectual and moral integrity compared to the West. Okay, These days you will see the science of yoga. Okay, then breathing, everything else has been culturally misappropriated by the West, and they give it fancy names as thoracic breathing, cardiovascular breathing. Call it what it is. Okay, it is called pranayam, it is called yoga, but it somehow reawakens the deep seated insecurity about them being an inferior race. Okay, so hence they do not want to concede. All right, so yes, the third and the final step in formulating the Aryan problem, this is what RC Majumdar writes. The third and the final step in formulating the Aryan problem was taken by Max Muller, who declared in emphatic terms, Aryan in scientific language is utterly applicable to race. Okay, Max Muller, not a big fan of this individual. He has plagiarized a lot. Okay, but anyways, we are not going to sit and open up, older wounds and wallow in self-pity. That is fine. Anyways, we have given a lot to humanity. We have stopped keeping track. But right now we are going to focus on the Aryan problem. And Max Muller, he has declared, or he has maintained this stand, that Aryan in scientific language is applicable to race. Whereas there is a considerable scholarship that we'll cover in the next parts of this chapter. Is this they have theorized that Aryan as a term is usually applicable to languages and not race. Okay, so let's see. Now there was this scientist who goes by the name of Penka. Okay, the full name is not given in this book, but his work is given, and some of you might agree with his work. He goes on to write, language to be the organic product of an organism subject to organic laws. Meaning, so far the assumption has been that the land of Bharat was completely vacant. All the settlements in the land of Bharat have come from either from Mediterranean lands or from south of Russia or from Ural Mountains, Western Europe and whatnot. Nobody lived over here. Okay, so it is them who brought the Sanskrit language with them. This is one, theory that has a political bias. All right, but then there is other theory. The language of Sanskrit was indigenously developed by the people who lived on this land. Okay, and they were the indigenous natives, and they are rightly to be called Aryans, but we don't call them Aryans. Why? Because the Nazi Germany has spoiled that name. Nazi Germany was a cheap and a poor imitation of the Aryan way of life or the Aryan state. Okay, they tried to do it, they tried to copy it, but that they failed because of the corruption inherent in the Nazi Germany. But that's again a discussion about some other topic. Right now we are going to focus on this. So yes, language is an organic product of an organism subject to organic laws. If there is a language, okay, it grows up organically and is bound by those organic laws on which on the land on which it has come up. Okay, languages don't travel like that. For example, Hebrew. Okay, Hebrew as a language, if you see, it originated in the parts of West Asia. Okay, now the people who spoke Hebrew might have traveled as far as the eastern end of Russia as well. Okay, but that does not mean that people who have settled in the eastern lands of Russia can claim to have, we are the originators of that language. No. And I guess that is a very bad example as well. Okay, forget that. But yes, Sanskrit has originated on this land, and it is organic to this land. It is native and indigenous to this land. Nobody from outside came over here to teach us Sanskrit. That is one very big myth that we need to bust. Okay. So, yep. And this was Penka, and you'll find all across this. All right. Now, this is something that might be very interesting to all those commoners out there. Scholars of the history will already know this. Or if they already know, I don't know why they don't raise this very frequently in the public domain. But that is, I don't know why. So here, the same scientist or the same scholar, Penka, he come up with this theory. Okay. No organic relation between language on the one hand and race and geography on the other. Our method cannot but be empirical. So do you agree with this thing that there is no organic relation between language and the race and geography on the other? Okay, any language could come up in any part of the world, pack up its bag, go completely to the other part of the world and develop there as well. Is this really possible? Okay, does language have a permanent anchor, okay, in the land and in the geography and in the collective memory of a race? Okay, and the obviously most important empiric fact about the known Indo-European languages is that quite a large number of them are crowded together within the comparatively small space of Europe, covering covering practically the whole of the continent, whereas outside Europe, instead of a compact body of idioms of that speech family, are found only scattered members of it stretching out as it were in a single file. Now, this is something that might sound very interesting. The whole concept of Indo European languages, you'll see most of those languages are concentrated in in a small continent that is Europe. And only a few scattered ones, such as Sanskrit and all the other languages, come to the other extreme, that is East. Do you think this is a coincidence? And do you believe this theory to be true? The theory of Indo-European languages. Most of the languages of the Indo-European group, so-called Indo-European group, are concentrated within a small geography of Europe. But only Sanskrit comes as far as East. So how can these two things be connected? This is again an assumption on which the scholars, that we study in our textbooks and the schools base their theories on. So how do you think? How do you reconcile this fact? All right. Found only scattered members of it, stretching out as it were in single file between the Semitic and the Altaic Finno-Ugrian linguistic areas and ending at least in the age of earlier Rig Veda in the region of Punjab. The geographical distribution of the idioms of the Indo-European speech family therefore does suggest that the original home of the Indo-Europeans is to be sought rather in Europe than in Asia. Hence, okay, this brings out the inherent bias and the vested interest that the Europeans had with coming up this lies of Indo-European group of languages. They deliberately kept their languages, in the majority in the group of Indo-European languages, so they could legitimize their claims as being the original Aryan homeland. I don't know why are they so possessive about this Aryan identity, which clearly has nothing to do with them. Okay, so to justify and legitimize their Aryan credentials, they came up with this idea of Indo-European languages and kept all the European languages in there and only Sanskrit in that group. So that makes you want to think, why exactly were these things done? Because the bedrock on which this entire book is based is the Aryan migration theory, which has been completely falsified, demystified, busted, and proven incorrect. Okay, so this book was written in the 1930s. I'm not blaming RC Majumdar or accusing him of misguiding people. No, the time at which he wrote, okay, he was living in the times of racial superiority of the whites, where they had, covered the truth with so many lies that it would be very difficult for even RC Majumdar to unshroud these things. Okay. So yes, they conveniently kept all their European languages in the majority and only Sanskrit, so they could legitimize that, since more of our languages have Indo-European origins, hence we are the real Aryans. Okay. Let's see. RC Majumdar on page number 206 in this chapter writes, But while no definite conclusion about this much debated problem can yet be reached, it may be reasonably urged that had India been the original home of the Aryans, they would have certainly tried fully to Aryanize the whole of this subcontinent before crossing the frontier barriers in the quest of adventure. Okay, that is one. The fact that whole of South Asia and parts of North India to this day non-Aryan in speech is the strongest single argument against the Indian home hypothesis. especially as the existence of Dravidian speech pocket in Balochistan clearly suggests that the whole, or at least a considerable part of India, was originally non-Aryan in speech. So they usually, the argument that is put forward when somebody says that the original homeland of the Aryans was Bharat, okay, the argument that is put forward is that how do you explain the existence of Dravidian speeches in the areas of Balochistan and other? Don't you think the Aryans would have thought about fully conquering this land first and then going outwards? Okay, why don't you apply the same logic to the Nordics who came over here? Don't you think they would have fully, Sanskritized their areas such as Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and then came over here to teach us Sanskrit? Something that you might think. Okay. The cerebral sounds, RC Majumdar goes ahead and writes this: the cerebral sounds of Sanskrit, which sharply distinguish it from all other Indo-European speech families, including Iranian, are best explained as the result of Austric and Dravidian influence. So they come up with these lies, and false narratives of Dravidian speech. Okay, Dravidian was a geographical term; it has nothing to do with language. Okay, on the language of the incoming Aryans, could it be proved that the language of the prehistoric Mohenjo-daro culture was Sanskrit or Proto-Sanskrit? Then it might have been possible to argue that in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, India was the original home of the Aryans. So, what exact problem does the West have of acknowledging that the original Aryan homeland was Bharat, despite all the theories have been proven wrong? I guess it was, I don't remember the exact name of the scientist right now, but it was a white person, and in collaboration with the natives of Bharat, who demystified this theory of Aryan invasion. But that is besides the point. What is the problem that they have in conceding? Okay, let's read. There was another fellow, John Marshall. Okay, he also adopted this title of Sir. He goes on to write, now it is hardly an accident that precisely this Rudra and no other deity is regarded in the Vedic cult and religion as an apotropic god of aversion, to be feared but not adored. Offerings to all other gods are sacrificed into the fire, but those to Rudra and his servants are simply deposited at crossroads or various forbidding places. Rudra and the Rudriyas are therefore in every respect analogous to the Theoi of Greece, the gods of pre-Hellenic population of that country. Alright. Should not the Rudra gods too be regarded in the same way as gods of the pre-Aryan population? So there they also quote the gods. Okay. The Aryan gods, they requested, or they demanded rather, sacrifice. But there are certain other gods in the Vedic Aryan phase who, took offerings in the form of direct offerings, meaning you should keep all those offerings on the street. Okay, you must have seen this practice to this very day continues, where during certain rituals and certain traditional and cultural ways, people will worship something, they'll do their ablutions and place certain offerings at the crossroads. Okay, so the mere existence of this practice is quoted as something as an evidence to say that no, this is not non-Aryan practice, this is a Dravidian practice. Okay, and hence Bharat cannot be an original homeland, because if indeed it were an original Aryan homeland, the practice of home havan would be pretty much prevalent all across Bharat, which it is. You see a lot of home havan in the south of Bharat as well. It's not a hidden fact. Okay. This is again quoted as an evidence. On page number 208, he writes, thus from general linguistic considerations, we get for the Rigvedic language known to us as approximate date of 1000 BC. Okay. Again, this is a matter of dispute. Even dating is a matter of dispute when it comes to ancient history. Some scholars will accept certain other date, other scholars will accept certain other date. Okay. So there is no complete consensus amongst the scholars as well. Okay. So whom should we trust? These Westerners who had a clear vested interest in keeping us subjugated, or we should trust our native scholars. They might have had some bias, okay, but I'm pretty much happy with that bias when it is compared to the vested interest of the West. Okay, their bias would have been towards claiming to be a I would say claim a right, justful and rightful claim to a title for which there is literary and other evidences as well. Whereas on the other side, the British, they were manufacturing evidence, or the white person or the Westerners, they are manufacturing evidence to keep us away from the rightful identity that we have and have always had since the dawn of time. Okay. Further, on page number 208, RC Majumdar writes, the earliest indubitable trace of a definitely characterized Indo-Iranian language of the Indo-European family is to be found, as is well known, in the names of the four Vedic gods, Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and the Nasatyas, in slightly different forms, occurring in the record of treaties discovered at Bogaskai. Okay, Bogaskai is a place where very ancient artifacts have been discovered, and some traces of the Vedic gods, Mitra, Varuna, Indra, and Nasatyas, have been found. But since that place is now in Iran, it is said, okay, there was a different race altogether of Indo-Iranian, because how can you claim something to be Indian when the date, okay, in 1400 BC, there was no such language. Okay, India as a word exists in a lot of European languages such as French, Spanish, whereas that word was used to mention a place where the pagans lived, or where the exploration in the name of the gospel had not reached. Those were the places that were denoted as India. Okay, now all these languages, French, Spanish, English, and all these languages, they started later on. We are talking about 1400 BC. Okay, so how can we use a word that did not exist at that time to denote a place in 1400 BC? It's a clear, lies upon lies. Okay, so right now assume that the Indo-Iranian, there was also a different race altogether that came due to intermingling between the Aryans and the inhabitants of the early Persia. Yeah. Okay, so it's all conjectures and lies. Okay, now I don't blame RC Majumdar for it. Quite the contrary, I thank him for writing this book. So it is for us to see and judge and analyze. Okay, he has very smartly included the hypothesis of the native authors towards the end of the chapter to convey to the readers that no, there is considerable case to be made that indeed the original Aryan homeland was Bharat, not the West that it claims to be. Okay, so here is about on page number 209, he again writes, about 1760 BC, Babylon fell into the hands of the Kassites, who are known to have used the word Suryas to designate sun. Surya. Where have I heard this word earlier? Hindi, Sanskrit, all these languages, okay? Now in Babylon, no less, in the parts of West Asia and the northern Egypt, in those areas in Babylon in 1760, all right, in 1760, there were some artifacts discovered that had used the word Suryas. So how did they come to know about this word? Okay, and the explanation usually given by the Western scholars is they must have already known it, because since they were, you see how it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, since they are, the European continent, since it is the original homeland of the Aryans, they would have known the Aryan languages, that is Sanskrit. The word in the Sanskrit language, Surya, already existed. Hence, they must have already known it. Why would they have known it? Because it is the original homeland of the Aryans. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy based on lies. All right. Next up, on page number 2010, he writes, Most emphatic on this point is, however, Wilhelm Brandestein, who says, without, however, offering any new argument of his own, there can be no doubt that also Indians, again, there was no such word as India that existed in the 1700 BC. In fact, the language from which this word is taken did not exist for the coming, bunch of centuries. So again, when you have to be very careful when you study the history of Bharat. Okay, India as a word has no organic origin in Bharat, so you cannot use that word to denote the geography that is Bharat. So yeah. So because since this is written by RC Majumdar in those times, I'm using that word. Okay. So Wilhelm Brandestein says, without, however, offering any new argument of his own, there can be no further doubt that also Indians have lived in further Asia. And when you say further Asia, he means the further ends of Southeast Asia, even some parts of Korea as well. Okay, so all these parts of the world, they were not devoid of any Sanskrit or Aryan influence. All right. Again, there are further theories. On page number 210, RC Majumdar writes, Indo-Iranians from their original home should have begun about 2000 BC. Again, Indo-Iranians. Okay, they come up with another theory because they are not willing to concede that this geography is the original Aryan homeland. They will come up upon theory upon theory. There was another race of people known as Indo-Aryans who started migrating outwards. Okay. Home should have begun this, and since the Indo-Aryans had become completely Indianized when the Rigvedic culture started on its course as a distinct product on the Indian soil by 1500 BC. Okay. Next up, on 211, he writes, on the ground of similarity between prehistoric ceramics of about 2800 BC discovered in eastern Anatolia and Macedonia, that is Turkey and all those parts, Goetze, he is another scientist, another historic scholar, he writes, Goetze concluded that the Indo-European Hittites entered Asia Minor from Europe after crossing the straits. Okay, there is another race of people who were called Hittites. Okay, they also allegedly were of Aryan strand or the Aryan origin. Okay, now it is said, okay, since there are some ceramics that have been discovered in Turkey, and since this race had an Aryan origin, allegedly, for which there is no proof, so it is said that this fellow individual who goes by the name of Goetze, he came up with this theory that they might have entered Turkey from the western side. Now, why would he exactly come up with this theory without any conclusive evidence? Because they had to legitimize their claims of being the original homeland to Aryans. Since they came from the west, hence Europe must have been the original homeland. But wait, there is more. But this theory does not and cannot explain why in the historical period the Hittites were settled not in western but in the central and eastern Asia Minor, and is not without reason that Edward Mayer suggested instead that they came from the east. Now there is another section of scholars who say that no, they could not have come from the western part or the European part of Turkey. They almost likely came from the eastern part, because if you see the Hittites, they settled in the central and the eastern part of Turkey, not on the western part. So you'll see there is no unequivocal theory or position about the origin of the Aryan and the origin of the Aryan race and the origin of the Aryan culture. People are very much sensitive and possessive about claiming or staking their claim over this identity that is Aryan when they have no proof. Okay, whereas we have primary sources of literature that mention this geography as Aryavart. Okay, there are accounts where people say, I, the son of Aryas. We have those things, whereas these people don't. But since they are very hell-bent on convincing us that no, we are the original homeland, and it makes you want to wonder why exactly would they do this. That is again food for your thought, something for you to ponder upon, to do your own due diligence. Next up, on page number 212, he writes, Now, what happens is Lithuania is one country in the eastern part of Europe, and Lithuanian is a very old language. Okay, it is claimed that yes, and if we accept it, we shall have also to admit that Indo European original home could not have been very far removed from Lithuania. For bodily movement of peoples over long distances could not have been possible in those early times, excepting over a long period of clash and contact with alien races and speeches, and as the result of which the language of the immigrants could not have been profoundly modified. Okay, so largely the argument of Europe is based on this idea that since Lithuanian is a very old language and it is pretty much closer to Sanskrit, hence, okay, this part of the world might have been the original Aryan homeland. So that is the logic, because there are striking resemblances and similarities in the semantics and the structures and idioms of Lithuanian and Sanskrit, are the languages that exist in that part of the world. And hence, this is what makes them think, since they are striking similarities, this must have been the original homeland of Aryans. And from this point and then further eastwards, the language might have spread and reached perfection when it reached the geography of Bharat. Because this is their theory, for which they have no conclusive evidence. This is again postulates and theories and assumptions on which the future scholars will base their arguments on. Largely, our history textbooks and reference materials base their arguments on these things, which are assumptions. So we don't know how deep down the rabbit hole goes, the amount of lies that we were taught and are still being taught. Okay. Further, RC Majumdar writes, the oldest attested Indo-European language of Europe, namely Greek, is frankly an import from outside. As Hall aptly says, like Sanskrit, Greek with all its entirely Indo-European syntax and grammar has a vast non-Indo-European vocabulary. Okay. Greek is the oldest thing that they have. Let's face it. The Western world that claims so much of pride in the language that is Greek. Okay, listen to this. Greek with all its entirely Indo-European syntax and grammar has a vast non-Indo-European vocabulary. So the majority of the words in the Greek language come from language that is not a part of Indo-European group. How is this possible? The reason was that same in both cases. In both lands, the invading people found a previously existing non-Aryan race with which they mingled. Okay, the Hindus with the Dravidians, the Greeks with the Minoans, and in both cases, while the language of the conqueror prevailed, that of the conquered supplied innumerable names and words to its vocabulary. So the logic that they used to explain this thing, that there were multiple strands and fragments and splinters from the unitary whole that was the Aryan race. Okay, and these races, they developed these languages that today we like to call as Indo-European languages. Okay, that is again a misnomer. There was no such place in India at the time that we are talking about. So how can we use that word? So you see the problem in the comprehension of the history of Bharat, because they've invented certain new words and definitions in a language that did not exist at that point in time. Okay. In both the countries, the conquered race, yes. So they conquered them, and the Indo-European languages, they existed, and they also borrowed some of the things from the language of the conquered race. This is again without any conclusive evidence. This is just a theory. Okay, so it should come as a surprise to you, because it did come to me as well. The more deeper you study this subject of history, you would realize it's all based on assumptions. The people who claim to be historians, because as a student, when I started learning this subject, I was in the aura of certain people, like, oh, this person might have been so learned, he has written so many books, he has come up with so many theories. But the more you read, the more you'll realize all these people were not smarter than you. They base their theories on assumptions. There are no conclusive evidences of these things. So, for all I know, you can believe whatever you want. Thus, the most archaic, that is Lithuanian, as well as the oldest attested Greek Indo-European language of Europe, fails to make out a definite case for the European original home of the Aryans. Okay, so clearly, Lithuanian and all these, even the Greek language. Okay, so this theory that there were multiple splinters from the unit whole of the Aryan race, and those were the people who settled in different parts of the European subcontinent, and hence majority of the Indo-European language. And since the majority of the Indo-European languages has more European languages, hence this was the original Aryan homeland, which is clearly a lie. Okay, because there is no conclusive evidence for this. There are multiple scholars out there. You can do your own due diligence. There are multiple scholars out there who have proved it beyond a shed of doubt. Okay, so again, I request you to do your own due diligence. Do not take my word for it. In spite of this inconvenient fact, a Germanic home theory has always been popular with many eminent European scholars for racial reasons. This is what was the germ of the thought of the superior Aryan race on which the Nazi Germany, the regime of Nazi Germany was based. Okay, the Germanic home theory. It is argued by them that the interior of the Germanic countries, particularly Scandinavia, cannot be proved to have been ever occupied by any alien race. Okay, the Scandinavian countries of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they are the those are the countries or the lands that have been never conquered by anyone. Hence, let us assume that those are the lands that might have birthed the Aryans. This is again an assumption. There is no conclusive evidence for this. This is simply based on the fact that these lands were never conquered, and hence they should have been, or they must have been, the original Aryan homeland. Okay. Cannot be. Yes, it is argued by them that the interior of Germanic countries, particularly Scandinavia, cannot be proved to have been ever occupied by any alien race. If yet the Germanic tribes have always spoken an Indo-European tongue, so it is asserted, because it is impossible to prove the contrary. So that is the whole reason. The logic is, since you cannot prove otherwise, this has to be true. Why don't you extend that logic to the theory that the original homeland of Bharat, the original homeland of Aryans was Bharat? Because you clearly cannot prove that otherwise beyond the reasonable doubt. Okay, the logic should be universal. If you are, extending a logic to prove your point, that logic must stand the test of the entire earth, the philosophies and the ideologies of entire earth, not just for your convenience. Okay. It is argued by them that the interior of the Germanic countries, particularly Scandinavia, cannot be proved to have been ever occupied by any alien race. If yet the Germanic tribes have always spoken an Indo-European tongue, so it is asserted, because it is impossible to prove the contrary, that it will have to be assumed that Indo-European speech came into existence on Germanic soil. And that is to admit that Germany or some Germanic country was the original home of the Aryans. And this is the germ of the thought of Nazi Germany. This is something that they will use as a justification to legitimize whatever deeds that they did in the name of National Socialism in the Nazi Germany. Okay. Thus, the West Baltic coast has been regarded as the home of Aryans, chiefly on the ground that the oldest and the simplest artifacts of the period following the Paleolithic age, as well as tasteful and technically perfected stone implements, are found there in abundance. But it has been rightly pointed out that in that case, the equally numerous and handsome stone artifacts of New Zealand would be an evidence for high antiquity of Maori culture. Okay, simply there were some implements that were found. and the West Baltic coast, the Germanic homeland. That has been used as one of the evidences to convince the world that indeed the Germanic land is the original Aryan homeland, because there were some seemingly perfect artifacts and implements that were found on that land in the form of artifacts. Okay, then there is one argument to be made. Even in New Zealand, there have been found some artifacts of Maori culture. So that cannot be used as an argument. Okay. The discovery of similar patterns on the prehistoric pottery of South Russia, Poland, and Ukraine, which were older than those of Germany, negatives the theory of original, because there are artifacts even older than the ones discovered in Germany that have been discovered in the parts of Russia, Ukraine, and Poland as well. So this theory of Germany being original homeland is clearly been negated. Now it makes you wonder, why did Hitler exactly attack Poland? Because there are some artifacts in Poland that were discovered that were older than the ones that were discovered in Germany, and hence he wanted to legitimize this claim of them being the original Aryan homeland. Okay, nothing happens without any reason. Okay, if you believe in coincidence, probably you are ignorant and you will end up being a useful idiot. Okay, so always believe in the sense of reason and appeal to your reason. All right. On page number 214, RC Majumdar writes, in recent times, the Aryan problem has been hopelessly mixed up with the race question by the European scholars of a certain school of thought who, failing to achieve their object with the help of linguistics and archaeology, have adopted racial anthropology as their chief weapon of battle, starting with the assumption that blonde hair was the chief characteristic of Indo-Europeans. Okay, now since they have realized that language cannot win them this battle of claiming that they are the original homeland to Aryans, they have fallen back upon anthropology. Okay, then they have come up with this theory that blonde hair is the marker of the original Aryan race, and hence naturally Germany was chosen as the homeland of Aryans. Why? Because majority of the Germans have blonde hairs. It's written in this book. You would have to buy this book and read it for you to know. Okay. In fact, this is something that I discovered while reading this book. I did not know this. Okay. Let's see. In fact, the grammarian Patanjali declared blonde hair to be one of the essential qualities in the Brahmans. Two Brahmans, therefore, should have been blondes in the pre-Christian era. And yet Bharat, the land of Brahmans, has never been claimed as the original cradle land by the racial theorists. So I guess Panini wrote this book way before all these things. So he has also said that blonde hair is the real indicator of the Brahmans. Something I discovered while reading this book. Even I did not know this. So I guess you should explore this angle further, because I'm still unsure. What did Patanjali mean when he said that Brahmins have blonde hair? Yeah. Brandestein shows first that Indo-Iranian reveals an older stage of evolution than that reflected in all the other Indo-European dialects put together. And from this, it draws the reasonable conclusion that the Indo-Iranians were the earliest to separate from the main body of Indo-Europeans. So imagine this. Westerners now claim, okay, you'll have to imagine a little bit to understand the absurdity of this claim. Okay. So based on the false lies that has been told that the original Aryans, let's, for the sake of argument, assume that the lies that were told to us are indeed true. Okay, let's assume that the parts of Europe, the Scandinavian and the Nordic parts of Europe, are the original homeland of Aryans. Let's assume that for the sake of argument. Okay, so they originated over there. They kept on fighting. They came up until the current day Pakistan. Okay, the daughter state that has been formed after vivification of Bharat. Okay, they came up until over there. And it is only after the centuries of coming over there, then they bifurcated into a separate race altogether that was called Indo-European. And they were the first one to bifurcate. So all this while nobody bifurcated. Keep in mind there are also majority of the Indo-European languages are in the European subcontinent. Okay, so all this while nobody bifurcated. It is only after reaching over here and then moving westwards that the bifurcation started. Okay, this is again an assumption. We don't have conclusive evidence for this. So this is, they think that. Okay. So Indo-Iranians were the earliest to separate from the main body of Indo-Europeans, and that the other tribes continued to live together for some time after their departure. Indo-European of the period previous to the cessation of the Indo-Iranians he calls early Indo-European. Indo-European of the period posterior to that cessation is called late Indo-European. So after the split, okay, now that there were, Indo-Iranians, for which again it's a misnomer, you cannot use the word India. Indo-Iranians, and now the Aryans that were left. Okay. Again, it's an absurd conjecture. In spite of the enormous increase in the knowledge since the days of Schrader, it would be best, therefore, to adhere to this conclusion that South Russia, more than any other region, can claim to be regarded as the cradle land of the Aryans. Okay, so to this very day, it has not been conceded by the world, and I would say we should give up of this hope and give up of this yearning for validation from the West. They are never going to recognize that we are a superior race. We'll have to believe that we are a superior race. I can't believe I have to say it in this manner, but it is what it is. It will not matter how many conclusive proofs we provide. Unless this paradigm of seeking the validation changes and accepting that we are who we are, things will not change. So currently it is the land south of Russia is usually regarded as the original Aryan homeland, for which there is no conclusive evidence, of course, but yep. Now comes the best part about this book. Okay, I would really have to credit RC Majumdar for doing this, because even after writing this entire chapter based on the Aryan migration theory, he chose to include the theories, conclusions, and the narratives of the Indic scholars, the indigenous scholars. Okay, names of M.M. Ganganath Jha, and there is another one, L.D. Kalla. Okay, these two people have come up with theories that prove that it is, because these theories will sound more convincing to you other than these, useless lies told by the Westerners. And I would say we should put our weight behind them. Okay, enough of this obsession with the Western scholarship. All right, so RC Majumdar writes on page number 220, and he knew that people in future will read this book and people in the future will disagree with him. So he has added this as in the form of an appendix in that same chapter. Chapter number 10, there is Aryan problem. Okay, so he writes, there is no evidence to show that Vedic Aryans were foreigners or that they migrated into India without traditional memory. Sufficient literary materials are available to indicate with some degree of certainty that Vedic Aryans themselves regarded Sapta Sindhu as their original home. So the people who existed on this land, if they regarded Bharat as their original homeland, why are we discussing that no, they were wrong, that was not their original homeland, they were lying? Is that the narrative? Because they themselves have agreed, and there is literary evidence to prove that they themselves called Bharat as their original homeland. Then why are we arguing about where was the original Aryan homeland? That makes you want to wonder, okay, what is the ulterior motive behind not letting us reclaim our original identity? Okay, migrating races look back to the land of their origin for centuries. Okay, so even for the sake of argument, if we assume that the original Aryans did not originate on this land, that is Bharat, let us assume that they came up from Scandinavian countries and Nordic countries. Why exactly haven't they mentioned anything about them in the Vedic literature? if they have come after here and their original homeland, because it is basic human nature, longing for your homeland. They've written nothing about it in the Aryan literature or the Vedic literature. So that's a curious case. Did they completely forget about their homeland? Or maybe the theory of Nordic races coming over here is false. The Vedic Sanskrit has the largest number of vocables found in the Aryan languages. If the pre-Vedic Aryan language was spoken in different parts of Europe and Asia, where the Aryans had settled before coming to Bharat, how is it that only a few vocables are left in the present-day speech of those parts, while the largest number of them is found in the distant places of ultimate settlement and racial admixture in Bharat? To this very day, you will see some, these things exist, these Aryan languages. So why exactly has it not survived in the West, which claims to be their original Aryan homeland? Okay. The third argument. The Vedic literature is the earliest extant record of the Aryan mind. The Rig Veda, all the Samhitas, all the Shrutis. Okay, keep in mind whatever is surviving are loose translations that had survived in the 12th and the 13th centuries of the Islamic plundering. Okay, even they are not the originals. It was a stroke of destiny that these translations survived. Okay. So the Vedic literature is the earliest record of the Aryan mind. How is it that in the course of their journey to the Sindhu, the Sapta Sindhu, the Aryans left no such record elsewhere? Okay, so from their long and arduous journey, let us assume this romantic theory of that they came from this Scandinavian lands with blonde hair and blue eyes. Okay, so they traveled all this way and they have written nothing about that travel. This absence of literary records in other countries cannot be explained away by a hypothesis that Aryans only reached a high stage of cultural evolution in Bharat. You know how is this question countered by the Westerners? That no, only after reaching the geography of Bharat they learned how to write. And hence, all this while they did not know how to write. Only after coming to Bharat they learned how to write. So much for being a superior race. The next argument is, these arguments do not carry much weight in view of the fact that the Harappa civilization of the Indus Valley shows little trace of lion, but is fully conversant with the worship of the tiger and the elephant as indicated by the seals. If, in about 3000 BC, the elephant and the tiger were so well known in Punjab, it is absurd to suppose that they disappeared so completely as to be not mentioned in the Rig Veda in the 1500 BC. Even the animals, we are told that so and so animals are of the Aryan origin and they brought it over here. Okay. And the last part, I would say, we are also going to discuss this in detail in chapter number 13. That is what RC Majumdar writes. But here, to quote it as evidence, he says, Punjab and the neighboring regions constituted the home of the people who composed the hymns written in the Rig Veda. There is no good ground for the belief that they or their ancestors lived in any other country. Okay, so in Rig Veda, they describe some of the geography. Okay, and after we are going to analyze that geography in chapter number 13. Right now we are in chapter number 10, but in chapter number 13, RC Majumdar is going to analyze the geography. And that geography matches and coincides with that found in the land of Punjab. Okay, so this is it. So this should give you some clear understanding into why exactly world wants to stake the claim to this Aryan identity, because it was the epitome of human civilization, and they cannot stand to concede and acknowledge that the epitome and the peak of the development of human civilization came on the land of Bharat, not in their land. Okay. That's all for this chapter. The next chapter is on Indo-Iranian relations, which is clearly a misnomer because India did not exist in those times. But yes, chapter number 11 is about Indo-Iranian relations. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.